The forest near the border was quiet, but Princess Lysandra could feel something hiding in the dark. She moved carefully, her long black cloak brushing over wet leaves. The cold air touched her pale skin, but she did not shiver. As a vampire, cold never bothered her. What troubled her was the silence. It was too quiet, even for the deadwood forest. She wasn't supposed to be here alone, but Lysandra had never liked rules. Her father, King Malrath, always warned her, "Stay away from the edge of the kingdom. That is where the beasts roam." But tonight something pulled her here. A strange dream, perhaps. Or maybe it was her heart, tired of royal walls and endless talk of marriage and duty. She heard a crack behind her. A branch snapped. She turned, eyes glowing faint red. Out from the trees came three cloaked figures. Not humans. Not even common vampires. These were the wild ones, rogue blood hunters who fed without permission and lived like shadows. They smiled with teeth too sharp and eyes full of hunger. Princess Lysandra, one hissed, "You shouldn't be here." She drew her blade, silver and carved with runes. "Back away," she warned. But they didn't listen. The first one attacked. She blocked him, spun, and struck back. The second lunged. She dodged, but not fast enough. Claws tore her arm, and her blood hit the ground. She gasped. Her vision blurred. One rogue laughed. And then from the trees, a deep growl rose like thunder. Something fast, huge and wild, leaped into the fight. The rogue trying to hold Lysandra screamed as claws tore through him. The other two turned, confused, but it was too late. The creature moved like fire through dry grass. One by one, the rogues fell. Then all was still. Lysandra sat up, her arm bleeding, breath shaking. The creature stood before her, tall and broad, part man, part beast. A werewolf. Her enemy. But he didn't strike. Instead, he looked at her wound, then knelt beside her. His eyes, glowing silver, met hers. "You're hurt," he said. She was too stunned to speak. He reached gently toward her wound. "Your blood will draw more if we don't stop it." She flinched. "Don't touch me. I'm trying to help." She hesitated, but let him. His claws retracted. He pressed his warm hand to the wound, then tore cloth from his shirt and wrapped it. Lysandra stared at him, confused. "Why did you help me?" He looked down. "Because you didn't scream when you saw me." She blinked, then slowly nodded. He stood up. "You should go. It's not safe here." She stood too, weak but curious. "What's your name?" He paused. "Rael." And then he was gone, running into the trees. Lysandra stood alone, bloodied and breathless, but something inside her had changed. She didn't know what it meant yet. But she knew this. She would see him again. The next morning, the castle stood tall and silent under a gray sky. Cold wind brushed through the high stone towers of Dravaria. Inside her room, Princess Lysandra sat near the window, staring at the woods in the far distance. Her arm was wrapped in white cloth. The wound had closed, but her thoughts were open, messy and wild like a storm. She kept hearing that voice. "You didn't scream when you saw me." Why had he helped her? Why didn't he run or fight her like most wolves would? Rael. A werewolf, an exile, a stranger. But something in his eyes stayed with her. Kindness in a place where she expected anger. The memory burned brighter than fire. And worse, it felt real, far more real than anything in the royal court. That evening her father entered the chamber. King Malrath walked with power, dressed in heavy black robes and a crown made of obsidian thorns. "You were reckless," he said, his voice cold. "The forest is not yours to walk." Lysandra stood tall. "I was only scouting. It was nothing." "You were attacked," he replied, "and the council suspects it was the werewolves." Her heart jumped. It wasn't them. The king raised an eyebrow. "You seemed sure." She paused. "Because the attackers were vampires. The wild ones, not wolves." He didn't reply for a moment, only nodded. "Even so, your wedding must not be delayed." The blood hair of House Vaughan will arrive in 3 days. Her hands tightened at her sides. You will unite the kingdoms through this marriage, the king continued. That is your duty. She nodded slowly but said nothing. That night she left the castle. Again. Wearing a cloak darker than the shadows, Lysandra slipped through the gates and crossed the river where the border met the edge of werewolf lands. The moon was high, full, and glowing. The forest felt alive, like it waited for her. And then, he appeared. Rael stepped out from behind the trees. His coat was simple, his hair messy, but his eyes held the same calm light. I thought you wouldn't come, he said. I shouldn't have, she replied, breathing fast. He took a step closer. Then why did you? She looked away. I don't know. But she did. Because with him, she didn't have to be a princess. She didn't have to wear crowns or speak carefully. She could breathe. Rael looked at her wrapped arm. Does it still hurt? No, she said. But something else does. He didn't ask what. They stood in silence under the stars, two people who were never meant to meet, but somehow fate had brought them here again. When they spoke next, they didn't talk about bloodlines or duties. They talked about rivers, about hunting stars, about things that didn't belong in castles. And when she left, she turned back once. He was still there, watching her like he cared. She walked home with questions in her heart. But she already knew the answer. She would see him again. The castle bells rang across the hills, echoing into the deep woods. Dravaria was preparing for the biggest event in a century, Princess Lysandra's wedding to the blood heir of House Vaughan. Red banners flew high from the towers. Servants rushed through the halls, hanging black velvet and silver cloth. Nobles arrived in long carriages. Everyone wore sharp smiles and carried sharp secrets. But the bride was missing. 3 days had passed since Lysandra's last visit to the forest. She had said nothing to Rael during their final meeting. No goodbye, no promises. But something in her eyes had spoken louder than words. Now, inside the castle, Lysandra stood before a mirror in her gown of shadows and silk. It was beautiful, heavy, and cold, just like her future. Behind her, the royal maid whispered, "You'll be the queen of both vampire realms. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Lysandra didn't answer. That night, at the wedding rehearsal, the blood heir entered the throne hall. He was tall, handsome in a cruel way. His armor shined like frozen steel. He smiled at her, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you like wandering forests," he said softly, offering his arm. "That will change soon." She took his arm, but her heart stayed distant. When the moon rose high above the ceremony circle, Lysandra looked up through the glass ceiling. The stars blinked, like they were watching. Something inside her snapped. She turned, stepped away from the blood heir, and spoke aloud. "This wedding is a lie." Gasps echoed. The king stood up sharply. "What are you doing?" "I won't be a prize in your game," she said. "I choose my own path." And then she ran. Guards chased her through the halls. Shouts rose. Swords were drawn. But Lysandra had planned this. She had left a hidden horse by the gate. As soon as she reached it, she rode fast into the dark forest. The castle disappeared behind her. The night air stunned her face, but she smiled, for the first time in days. She didn't stop until she reached the glade where she had last seen him. And he was there, waiting. Rael looked at her with surprise and stepped forward. "You came back." She jumped off the horse and nodded. "I left everything." "Why?" She took a breath. "Because with you, I feel alive, and I'd rather be free in the wild than a queen in a cage." Rael didn't speak. He just held out his hand. She took it. That night, under the open sky, they rested near the fire. No crowns, no guards, no lies. She leaned against him. He didn't pull away. Together, they watched the stars move slowly above the trees, not knowing what would come next, but knowing they'd face it side by side. Deep inside the forest, Lysandra and Rael found a small cave near a river. Moss covered the rocks, and birds sang in the trees. It was quiet, peaceful, and far from the noise of crowns and castles. For a few days, they lived like ghosts. No one knew where they were. No guards. No rules. Just the sound of wind in the trees and the warmth of the fire at night. Rael hunted deer, brought back berries, and made sure Lysandra stayed safe. She, in return, told him stories of her childhood, how she had once dreamed of flying, not ruling. But peace never stays long when kingdoms are angry. Back in Castle Droveria, King Nalrath was furious. His daughter had run away on the night of her royal wedding. She had chosen a werewolf over her people, over her crown. He called the Vampire High Council, and together they made a dark choice. They would not send soldiers. They would send the Devourer. The Devourer was not a man, not a vampire, not even a beast. He was something older, created in secret during the old wars. Cloaked in black, silent as night, he moved like smoke and fed on both blood and soul. His task, bring Lysandra back alive, kill the wolf. One cold evening, Rael sensed something strange. The forest was too still. The birds had stopped singing. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. "We need to move," he said, standing. Lysandra looked up. "Why?" "I smell death." Before she could speak again, the trees behind them cracked. Something was coming. Rael grabbed her hand, and they ran. But the Devourer moved faster than light. He dropped from the trees like a shadow and knocked Rael back with one blow. Lysandra screamed, trying to help, but the creature turned to her with glowing white eyes. Rael got up, bleeding, growling low, "Stay behind me." But the Devourer was strong. He threw Rael against the rocks again and again. Each time, Rael got up, slower and weaker. Then Lysandra did something no vampire had done in centuries. She bit her own wrist and pressed her bleeding hand to Rael's mouth. "Drink," she whispered. Rael looked at her, afraid. "I'm not like you." "You are now," she said. "Just do it." He drank. At first, nothing happened. But then Rael screamed a deep, powerful sound. His body changed. His eyes glowed red and silver. He became faster, stronger, more than wolf, more than man. He charged at the Devourer with a roar that shook the trees. This time he didn't fall. The fight was short and wild. In the end, Rael stood over the broken remains of the creature. He was shaking but alive. Lysandra ran to him and held him tight. "You're not alone," she whispered. And for the first time, Rael believed her. After the battle, the forest was quiet again. Birds slowly returned. The wind passed gently through the trees, but Lysandra and Rael knew it would not stay peaceful for long. The Devourer had been powerful, and his death would not go unnoticed. They moved deeper into the wild lands, where no vampire or werewolf dared to live. There, hidden in the heart of the mountain woods, stood the ruins of an ancient temple. The walls were cracked, covered with vines, and the roof had fallen long ago. But something inside called to them. "This place feels old," Lysandra said softly as they walked inside. Rael nodded. "I've heard stories. They say this was the temple of the first moon." As they stepped deeper into the ruin, a strange glow lit the center of the floor. Symbols carved in stone began to shine. And in the middle, wrapped in cloth and bones, sat an old woman with silver eyes and no fear in her voice. "I've waited for you," she said. Lysandra took a step back. "Who are you?" "I am Marine, the last moonseer," she said. "I see what others fear to look at. I speak what others wish to forget." Rael's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean you waited for us?" The woman slowly stood. Her bones cracked, but her presence felt strong. She walked to the glowing circle and pointed at it. "This was written before your birth. A vampire of royal blood. A werewolf cast from his pack. When they join, old magic will wake." Lysandra and Rael looked at each other. Marine continued, "Long ago, your people made a deal. Vampires took power. Werewolves were cursed to serve or hide. That curse was passed through blood." "And now?" Rael asked. "Now your blood is mixed," she said, looking at him. "You are not only werewolf. You have her gift now. Her blood inside you. Together, you two are the key to breaking the curse. Lysandra frowned. How? The altar must be fed, Marine said with sadness in her voice. Royal blood must be spilled on the stone of the first moon. Rael took a step forward. Lysandra is the only royal left. Marine shook her head. No. There is one more. They froze. Your father, King Malrath, she said. His blood was the one that sealed the curse. Only his blood can end it. Lysandra felt cold. You want me to kill my father? I tell you only what the prophecy says, Marine replied. What you choose is your path. Rael looked at Lysandra. If we don't break the curse, this fight will never end. They'll keep hunting us. You'll never be free. Lysandra stared at the glowing circle, her heart heavy. She had run from her crown. Now she had to decide if she would end the rule it stood for. Dark clouds gathered over Castle Droveria. The air was cold, heavy with silence. Inside the throne hall, King Malrath sat on the black stone seat, his eyes burning with anger. His daughter had vanished. The blood heir had returned to his kingdom, humiliated. And now whispers of a werewolf roaming free with royal blood filled the corners of the court. But King Malrath was not only a ruler. He was also a father. And fathers, even cruel ones, could be broken. Then, one evening, Lysandra returned, alone. She wore a long cloak with dust from the road. Her hair was tied back, her eyes firm. She walked straight into the hall where her father sat. Guards moved, but the king raised his hand. Leave us. The room emptied. You ran, he said. I did. You chose a beast. I chose my heart. His fingers curled around the armrest of the throne. You return now. Why? Lysandra stepped forward. To talk. To end this war between our kinds. To stop the curse. King Malrath's face remained cold. That curse gave us power. You want to throw it away? I want peace. I want a world where I don't have to choose between love and duty. The king stood slowly. Then you are not my daughter. Behind a column, unseen by Lysandra, someone listened. Her twin brother, Prince Alric. His face was pale with shock and rage. That night, Alric visited Lysandra's chamber. He smiled gently, pretending to be glad. You came back, he said. I had to, she whispered. He won't listen, Alric, but I have a plan. Alric nodded, but his eyes did not match his smile. The next morning, Rael came to the edge of the city wall, dressed in a hooded cloak. Lysandra had sent word. They had a secret way in. She met him at the old chapel gate. But before they could enter, a group of guards surrounded them. Lysandra's eyes widened. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. Alric stepped out from the shadows. Sister, he said coldly, you've betrayed our family, our bloodline. Alric, please. He didn't listen. Rael was captured, chained, and taken deep into the dungeons. Lysandra was locked in her old tower room, alone with her thoughts. Later that night, her brother visited again. You should have stayed gone, Alric said. You brought danger to our gates. You don't understand, Lysandra replied. Rael is not a danger. He's the answer. Alric's expression darkened. Then both of you are a threat. And he left her in silence. In the cold dungeon below, Rael's strength was fading. He sat chained, blood dripping from his lip, thinking of her. But even now, even broken, he knew Lysandra would come. And when she did, the walls of Droveria would never be the same again. The sky burned red over Castle Droveria. It was the night of the blood moon, a rare and powerful event. Old stories said that when the blood moon rose, ancient magic grew stronger. In the royal court, the nobles gathered in silence. Candles flickered, and long shadows danced across the stone walls. At the center of the great hall stood the altar of obedience, where kings once sealed their rule with blood. King Malrath stood behind the altar, dressed in black and silver. His voice echoed as he addressed the crowd. Tonight, we end betrayal. We cleanse our bloodline, and we restore order. Beside him stood Prince Alric, cold and proud. Guards surrounded the altar, and in chains, kneeling before them, was Rael. His head was bowed, his body weak, but his spirit burned. From the far side of the hall, a door opened. Everyone turned. Princess Lysandra entered, wearing a red gown that shimmered like flame. Her steps were slow, but her face showed no fear. "I'm here," she said. "Let him go." King Nalrath raised his hand. "You have broken the law. You chose the enemy. There is only one way to fix this." Lysandra's eyes narrowed. "No, there's another way." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a scroll, ancient, sealed in wax. "The prophecy," she said. "Your steel is on it." Gasps filled the hall. The scroll told of the curse, the blood pact, and the sacrifice needed to break it. "You knew," she said to her father. "You knew that royal blood must be spilled to end the curse." The king's face hardened. "And you wish me to give up my life?" "I wish for peace," she replied. "But peace needs truth, and truth needs sacrifice." Prince Alric stepped forward. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted. "She's been poisoned by the wolf." Suddenly, Rael lifted his head. His eyes met Lysandra's. In that moment, they understood each other without words. She moved to the altar. Guards tried to stop her, but she raised her hand, and the air around her shimmered with power. Rael's blood was inside her. Her strength had grown. She stood beside her father. "You taught me duty," she whispered. "Now let me show you courage." Before the king could move, she cut her own palm and placed it on the altar. Her blood sizzled against the stone. The ground shook. The sky outside cracked with thunder. Then Rael, despite his chains, rose to his feet. He howled, not in pain, but in power. The magic spread through the hall like fire. The chains broke. The guards fell back. And the curse, the one that had divided vampire and wolf, began to break. The nobles watched in fear, but Lysandra did not. She reached for Rael's hand. And under the red moon, the future changed forever. The red light of the blood moon faded into soft silver as dawn crept over the land. The curse that had once divided vampires and werewolves was broken, but the world was not the same. Lysandra and Rael stood side by side on a hill overlooking the valley below. The castle, once cold and dark, now seemed smaller, less important. Their hands were joined, and in their eyes was a promise, a future made by choice, not by law. They did not return to the throne. They did not wear crowns or robes. Instead, they built a new kingdom, a kingdom of flesh and flame, where all were welcome. The forest became their home. In time, others came. Werewolves and vampires, tired of war, tired of fear. They came to hear the story of Lysandra and Rael, of courage and love that broke old chains. Together, they hunted not for blood, but for freedom. They danced beneath the moonlight, not as enemies, but as equals. Lysandra taught those who listened about peace and strength. Rael taught them about loyalty and courage. In the heart of their new kingdom, a child was born. A boy with eyes like polished obsidian and a heartbeat strong like thunder. He was neither fully vampire nor fully wolf, but both. His name was Aaron. He was the first of a new age, a symbol of hope. The people whispered stories of how Lysandra and Rael had changed the world, how love could rewrite even the oldest laws. But peace did not come without struggle. Some in the old courts wanted to take back power. They sent spies and assassins. Lysandra and Rael faced these threats not with swords alone, but with wisdom and unity. Their kingdom grew strong because it was built on trust, on choice, on the belief that enemies could become family. On clear nights, Lysandra and Rael would sit by the fire and watch the stars. "I never dreamed this life," Lysandra would say. Rael smiled. "Neither did I. But I'm glad we found it together." And so, the story of the vampire princess and the werewolf exile became legend. A tale of rebellion, hope, and the power of love to change everything. Because in the end, it was not a crown or a kingdom that mattered. It was the choice to live free and to live together.